The rain did not simply fall, it attacked. It hammered against the windows of Maple and Pine Cafe with small, furious blows, sliding down the glass until the entire world outside the corner of Atlantic and Henry in Brooklyn looked as though it were being washed away, blurred like a memory being erased. Inside, I pressed my palm against the cold pane, my breath leaving a thin haze on its surface, my feet aching in the way only 14 hours of standing can ache, smiling, serving, holding myself together just enough to survive. Behind me, the espresso machine hissed and sputtered as if it, too, was running out of strength. The clock above it flickered 11:03 at night, and all I could think was, how did I end up here? The cafe was nearly empty. A couple whispered through an argument in the corner, their untouched cups of lukewarm coffee sitting between them like a silent referee. A man in a wrinkled shirt tapped furiously at his keyboard as though he could type his way out of a midlife crisis. Outside, Brooklyn shimmered with streetlights bleeding through the gray curtain of rain. Inside, I was just a tired 28-year-old woman with an unfinished nursing degree, an apron that smelled of burnt milk, and a handful of broken dreams. And then he walked in, tall, composed, the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he claimed it. Raindrops clung to his charcoal wool coat, tailored to perfection, as if even they were afraid to disappear from him. Behind him were 3 other men, silent, sharp, dangerous, moving like shadows, their eyes sweeping the cafe with the wary precision of people who had seen too many dark corners of this world. I should have looked away. I should have gone back to wiping table number 4 and pretended I hadn't noticed the predator who had just stepped into my small, dim world of coffee and soft jazz. But I didn't. I looked, and in that brief moment, everything changed. In that suspended moment when the air inside the cafe seemed to solidify, just before my world was about to turn upside down once more. If you are following this story and can feel each tense heartbeat the way I did that night, remember to subscribe to our channel, to press like and share so you can continue walking with us through many other stories filled with emotion every single day. And if you are listening from Brooklyn, from Saigon, from Hanoi, or from any quiet little corner of the world, leave a comment to let us know where you are watching from, so I can imagine exactly how far this story of mine is traveling across the map tonight. He stepped across the threshold as if this world had belonged to him long before he arrived, unhurried, needing no proof of anything, leaving behind only a faint trail of rainwater dripping onto the wooden floor. For a few seconds, the entire cafe seemed to be drained of sound. The gentle jazz playing through the speakers still lingered, yet it felt as though it had receded from reality. I stood frozen, my heartbeat slowing and then quickening in a way that made no sense as my eyes skimmed across the face of the man before me. Vincent DeLuca. I did not know his name then, only that he carried a kind of presence that made you want to step back while being unable to look away. A silent pull, impossible to resist. The warm yellow light reflected off his dark, perfectly slicked back hair, a raindrop tracing a slow line down the sharp edge of his jaw, giving me the strange sensation that I was witnessing something dangerous and beautiful at the same time. I had never seen anyone like him. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He did not need to look to command attention. His presence alone was a fracture in the familiar world I had known, something so foreign that it made me feel smaller than the apron tied around my waist. One of the 3 men with him immediately took position near the door, silent as a shadow. The second swept his gaze across every corner of the cafe. The third stood behind Vincent, saying nothing, barely moving, his hand resting near his coat as though ready to draw out something lethal. Vincent chose the table in the corner with a clear view of both exits, the exact spot anyone who had lived with fear would choose if survival mattered. I noticed the shoulders of the man typing on his laptop tremble, and then he abruptly stood, shoving his things into his bag in a frantic rush, as though he had suddenly realized he was breathing the same air as something he did not want to be near. I did not blame him. I wanted to run too, but my legs felt heavy, anchored by an invisible thread. I stepped back toward the counter, my fingers gripping the tray of cleaning cloths, my mind spinning with questions. Who was he? Why did I feel this way? Why was no one else reacting as intensely as I was? Marcy, the cafe's almost 60-year-old manager, stood behind the counter, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she tried to pour coffee for the couple in the corner. I had known her long enough to recognize the tension tightening through her body. The air felt thick. My gaze accidentally collided with his for a fleeting second, brief, but enough for me to feel as if I had been pulled out of my own skin. His eyes were dark, deep, nearly unreadable. There was something in the way he looked at me, not a threat, not exactly interest, but a focused awareness, as if I were a code he was trying to decipher. I turned away instantly, my heartbeat pounding so hard I felt each throb rising into my throat. I had never looked at anyone like that. I had never been looked at like that. And in that strange, disorienting moment, I wondered, if he truly was someone dangerous, someone terrible, what was it about me that made him pause, even for a heartbeat? Instinct urged me to stay far away, but curiosity tugged at me like a fragile thread tying me to something larger than myself. Vincent did not speak a single word. He simply sat there, slowly removing his leather gloves and placing them neatly on the table, every gesture precise, almost calculated, yet carrying a kind of weight that lingered in the air. Each time he glanced around, I felt the cafe's light shift with him. I knew something was about to happen. I did not know why, but the stillness around Vincent DeLuca felt like the surface of a lake before a storm, unnaturally calm, and so dangerous that every cell in my body seemed to warn me. But I kept looking, and for the second time that night, I found myself unable to pull my eyes away from the man who had walked in and turned my entire world upside down. I was trying to pull my gaze away from Vincent DeLuca when the doorbell chimed again, an ordinary sound that, in that moment, made my skin prickle. The door swung open and a man stepped inside, drenched in the rain, his dark, long coat clinging to his thin frame like a shadow. He did not look around, did not hesitate, did not walk in like any normal customer. Something was wrong in a way that drained the air from my chest. My instincts recognized it long before my mind did. That man had not come for coffee. His hand was hidden beneath the wet fabric of his coat, his shoulders rigid, his cold eyes sweeping the room once before locking onto Vincent. Everything happened in less than a single breath. Vincent was still seated, his head tilted slightly toward the window, as if he were listening to something outside. One of his guards had already pivoted, the other froze with a spoon suspended mid-air, his gaze flicking with lightning speed. I do not remember when I started moving. All I know is that by the time the stranger drew his hand from inside his coat, revealing a black gun aimed straight at Vincent's head, I was no longer standing behind the counter. All sound collapsed. Every movement slowed in the thick air heavy with rain, burnt coffee, and something far colder. I screamed, or maybe it was only a sharp gasp tearing from my throat, and with every ounce of weight in my body, I lunged toward Vincent's table. I did not think. I did not have time to be afraid. I only knew one thing. If I did nothing, he would die right before my eyes. My hand grabbed the sleeve of Vincent's coat and yanked with all my strength, just as the gunshot exploded. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. It tore the world clean in two. The coffee cup on the table shattered, ceramic shards stinging my wrist. Vincent fell toward me from the force, or maybe he let himself fall, I could not tell anymore. We hit the floor hard, my back slamming against the leg of a chair, though I felt no pain. Screams erupted somewhere in the cafe, glass broke, then another gunshot cracked through the air. Vincent's body covered mine completely, one hand wrapping behind my head, the other already drawing his own gun. He pushed me down, his voice a low, taut whisper at my ear. "Do not move." His breath burned hot against my cheek, the sense of rain, gunpowder, and something metallic blending between us. I heard a returning shot, short, precise, controlled. One of Vincent's men had fired back. Someone shouted in Italian. Something heavy fell to the floor. A dead, suffocating silence flooded the room. I trembled under Vincent's weight, my cheek pressed against the ice-cold tile, my ears ringing from the gunfire. Only one thought pulsed through my mind. I pulled him. I just saved the life of a man who could kill me without blinking. Vincent lifted himself slightly, his sharp eyes sweeping the room in less than a second before he looked down at me again. His face was so close I could see every single eyelash beneath the flickering light, see the absolute focus in his expression and something else, deeper, stranger. "Are you all right?" His voice rough and low, like distant thunder layered beneath a storm. I nodded, unsure if I was even breathing. He pushed himself to his feet, still keeping me close as he checked the room. One of his guards signaled the all clear. "He's dead." Vincent released me and stood fully, but he did not walk away. He turned back, offering his hand, his palm open before me like a wordless acknowledgement. I looked up, placing my hand in his because in that moment there was no other choice. And when he pulled me to my feet, his dark eyes locked onto mine, and there was something in that gaze I knew I would never escape. "You just saved my life, Claire Monroe. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head, but I knew. From that moment on, everything had shifted onto a path with no way back. I was still trembling when Vincent pulled me up from the floor, his hand wrapped firmly around mine. warm and steady enough that for a brief moment I felt an inexplicable sense of safety in the middle of all the chaos unfolding around us. But only a few seconds later, the shattering of glass at the back of the cafe sliced through the uneasy calm like a blade, and a bullet whipped past my head, embedding itself in the pastry shelf behind the counter. Vincent immediately spun, shoving me down behind a wooden divider that separated the serving area from the hallway to the restrooms, covering me with the full weight of his body, one hand cradling the back of my neck while the other drew his gun so quickly I barely caught the movement. My back hit the floor for the second time in just a few minutes, but this time I did not scream. I simply held my breath, listening to the furious pounding of my heartbeat in my ears, and Vincent's ragged breath grazing my cheek. Gunfire erupted again, rapid and relentless, now coming from both sides. Another attacker had slipped in through the rear entrance, taking advantage of the chaos to approach Vincent from the blind corner. I could not see him, but I heard the footsteps, the clinking shells hitting the tile, the clipped Italian commands I did not understand but could feel the tension in every sharp syllable. Vincent pressed me tighter against the wall, shielding every inch of my body with his own. A gunshot exploded right beside my ear, sending a high, painful ring through my head, and then I heard the heavy thud of a body collapsing on the other side of the divider. Vincent's breath came harshly, but not wildly. He tilted his head, signaling to one of his guards who was crouched low as he moved toward the back counter. I saw blood spreading across the man's shoulder, but he kept advancing, gun aimed toward the kitchen. The remaining attacker clearly had not expected Vincent's men to move this quickly. Another controlled shot rang out, followed by a strangled cry. Vincent still did not leave my side. His eyes swept the cafe as though the entire layout had been etched into his mind. Outside, the distant wail of police sirens grew louder, inching closer with every second, and blue and red lights flashed across the shattered front window. A customer lay sprawled on the floor being pulled upright while the arguing couple hid behind overturned chairs, their faces pale, their bodies too terrified to move. I heard heavy boots pounding on the tile and then silenced gunfire stopping all at once. One of Vincent's guards signaled with his hand. The attackers had been neutralized. Only then did Vincent begin to lift himself off me, though his gaze never left my face for even a heartbeat. "Are you all right?" he asked again, his voice softer this time, as if he needed to make sure I was still here, still breathing, still whole. I nodded, my throat dry as though I had swallowed the entire storm. As he helped me to my feet once more, the cafe door burst open and 4 police officers rushed in with their guns drawn. One of them shouted for everyone to freeze. Vincent raised his hands to shoulder height without the slightest hint of panic, his expression steady, almost unnervingly calm. His guards followed suit, though none of them showed even a flicker of fear. The officer glanced at Vincent, then at me, trying to piece together the broken fragments of this violent, chaotic scene. Vincent turned his head toward me, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "Say as little as possible. Let my lawyer handle the rest." I nodded again, uncertain I could form a single coherent word. My hands were still shaking, my heartbeat was still stumbling out of rhythm. But one thing was unmistakably clear. I had just stepped into a world nothing in my old life had ever prepared me to face, and at the center of it stood the man who had just used his own body to shield me from a storm of bullets. I sat on the cold wooden chair in the corner of the cafe, a thin blanket draped over my shoulders by one of the rescue workers, my hands wrapped tightly around a cup of hot tea that had long since gone cold. Police officers moved in and out, photographing, measuring bullet holes, taking statements from the few people calm enough to speak. I was not one of them. I had tried to say something to the first officer who approached me, but all I heard was my own voice cracking, faltering. They were patient. A young policewoman, only a few years older than me, guided me to sit apart and wait. I understood. I was the one who had pulled Vincent DeLuca out of the line of fire, the one who had thrown myself into the middle of a gunfight when I should have run. I understood why they needed more answers, but I also understood something else. Everything tonight was far beyond any framework I had ever known. Vincent was still speaking with a group of officers near the door, his coat removed, revealing a white shirt stained with a faint smear of blood at the cuff, but it was not his. His eyes met mine once, only once, yet it pinned me to my seat, not a word. Just that look carrying something heavier than 1,000 questions. When a middle-aged detective finally sat down across from me, notebook ready, I tried to take a long breath, tried to arrange the chaos in my mind, but every image blurred: gunshots, shouted commands, the look in Vincent's eyes, the weight of his body shielding mine, all of it spinning without order. I told him what I had seen, from the moment Vincent walked in until the moment I pulled him out of the bullet's path, though I was not certain I remembered everything. He nodded, scribbling notes, then studied me in silence for a long moment. "How long have you worked here?" I answered that it had been a little over a year. He looked around the cafe, then back at me, as if trying to gauge what kind of person I was. I did not know whether I passed that silent judgment, but I knew I had been honest. When he left, another officer escorted me to the ambulance to check the scratches on my wrist and the bruising on my shoulder. I refused the hospital. I only wanted to go home. When I returned inside to retrieve my bag, Vincent was standing by the door, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone, as if everything that had happened was only a small interruption in another long day of his life. But when he saw me approaching, he put his phone away and, in a movement as quiet as breath itself, stepped closer. His gaze was no longer as sharp as before, still deep, still unreadable, but softened somehow, warmer, as if in a few short hours he had begun to see me differently. I stopped less than a meter from him, unsure what to say, when he spoke first. "You were not the only person in this cafe tonight, but you were the only one who moved toward the bullet." His voice was low and steady, tinged with something almost like disbelief, as though he still could not understand why I had done it. I swallowed hard. I don't know why either. Maybe because I saw something in you. Maybe a lonely kind of pride, or a tiredness without words. Or maybe it was just instinct. Vincent tilted his head slightly, as if considering the unspoken answer. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a business card. On it was a name, not his, but a law firm, a private number, and an email address. "If anyone gives you trouble because of tonight, or if you need anything at all." I accepted the card with both hands, as though it weighed more than paper. Vincent looked at me one last time. "I owe you a life, Claire Monroe, and I am not the kind of man who forgets a debt like that." Then he turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there with a business card and a sentence I knew, somehow, would never be just a polite formality. I returned to my small third-floor apartment in Crown Heights when the sky was already beginning to pale, my body damp even though the rain had stopped long ago, carrying only a biting cold against my skin and a strange emptiness in my chest that I could not yet name. I still had the business card Vincent had given me in hand, the paper slightly damp with sweat, though I could not remember how tightly I had been holding it. I pushed the door open as quietly as possible, not wanting to wake Lydia, my roommate of nearly 2 years. But before I even stepped inside, I saw her curled up on the sofa, a hood of an oversized sweatshirt pulled over her head, eyes wide from an entire night without sleep. When she saw me, relief flickered through her gaze, only to be swallowed immediately by shock. "God, Claire, are you okay? What on earth happened at Maple and Pine?" "I saw the news, the ambulances, the police. I kept calling and calling you." I collapsed beside her, my legs finally giving out. "I'm okay. I'm not hurt. It's just... everything happened so fast." I told her everything in pieces, slowly, haltingly, as if I were hearing the story myself for the first time. Vincent walking into the cafe, the way he looked, the first gunshot, the moment I threw myself toward him, the trembling in my body when I lay beneath the weight of his back shielding me. Lydia said nothing the entire time, only stared at me with a mix of awe and fear. When I ended with his words, "I owe you a life," she shot upright as if something had pricked her. "Claire, do you even know who he is? That name, Vincent DeLuca? I've heard it before. He's behind that chain of investment firms in Manhattan, and there are rumors he's tied to the Mafia. I'm not sure, but the papers mentioned it once, and there was some investigation a few years back. You saved a man like that." I looked at the business card in my hand, then folded it and set it on the table as if it could burst into flames at any moment. "I don't know who he is. I only know that when I saw a gun pointed at his head, I couldn't just stand there." Lydia stayed silent for a long moment before exhaling, then suddenly walked toward the door as if remembering something. "Someone came by with this about 20 minutes before you got home. Didn't say a name, just said it was for Claire Monroe, then left." She handed me a thick envelope wrapped neatly in plain white paper, no sender written anywhere. I opened it, finding a folded sheet of paper on top, handwriting slanted and precise. "Claire, I do not like owing anyone, especially a life. This is a small part of what I owe you for what you did tonight. I do not expect you to understand, only to accept it. Use it to continue whatever dream you once had before life forced you to abandon it. And if one day you need anything, call me, V." Beneath the letter was a stack of cash bound with a bank band, crisp and new, the ink still sharp and scent. I did not need to count it to know it was a large sum, but Lydia could not help herself. She pulled out a few bills, her face draining of color. Claire, this is $50,000. Oh my God, do you have any idea what this means? I said nothing, still holding the letter as if afraid it might slip away. I had a student loan I had never paid off, a nursing program left unfinished, a dream abandoned when my mother fell ill and I had to work full-time to cover the hospital bills. And now, after a single night, after a single reckless act, I was holding something that could take me back to the beginning. But that was not what made my heart pound. It was the last line of that letter. If one day you need anything, call me. I folded the paper and placed it atop the stack of money. Lydia stared at me, horrified. You're not going to get involved with him, are you? I looked at her, then at the faint morning light slipping through the thin curtains. I don't know, I whispered, but I have a feeling he isn't done with me yet. I did not sleep that night, nor did I truly sleep on any night that followed for many days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vincent's face caught in the flickering cafe lights, heard the bullet slicing through the air toward a man I had never met, felt the weight of his body pressed over mine in the dark haze of gunpowder. But what troubled me more than any of that was the envelope lying in my desk drawer, and the brief line in his letter echoing over and over in my mind. I do not like owing anyone. I had heard people say that nothing from men like Vincent DeLuca ever came without a price. Yet I also knew that I had never stood this close to an opportunity in my entire life. I had dropped out of my second year in the nursing program when my mother was hospitalized for kidney failure. My father had been gone since I was in middle school, and my older brother had never been someone I could rely on. I worked 2 jobs at the cafe and waiting tables at an Italian restaurant just to keep from slipping into a life that felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. And then one instinctive pull of a coat sleeve had changed everything. For a week afterward, I avoided opening the envelope again. Lydia watched me as if she feared I might disappear with it or turn into someone she no longer recognized. I feared myself too. I feared the relief I felt at the thought of going back to school, of leaving the cafe, of reclaiming a dream I had once believed was dead. Finally, one morning while Lydia was at work early, I sat alone in front of my computer and opened the registration page for my old school. My hands trembled as I typed each letter, only to stop again before the final confirmation box. I stared at the tuition fee, then at the envelope beside me. I am using money from a man the whole world whispers is dangerous, I thought. But if this is the only way to come back to life, to escape the spiral pulling me under each day, then maybe it was a trade worth making. Slowly, deliberately, I pressed each key, step by step, until the words appeared on the screen. Registration successful. I had gone back. I was officially a student again. I sat there long after the page turned white, feeling not triumph but something closer to gratitude, and somewhere deeper still, fear. I knew this would not end simply. No one gives $50,000 for nothing. But I also knew Vincent DeLuca was a man who said he would not forget a debt, and if I was the one carrying that debt, then this was the way I chose to repay it. I began rearranging my work schedule, asking for fewer shifts at the cafe so I could attend classes. Lydia sighed but did not argue. I knew she was still worried, still afraid of anything connected to Vincent, and perhaps afraid of what might become of me. Yet I could also see her relief as she watched me return to the Claire I used to be, the Claire with clear goals and eyes no longer clouded by exhaustion. I bought used textbooks, borrowed materials, printed my class schedule, and rebuilt every small piece of a path I once believed had shattered beyond repair. But each time I closed my books and night settled in, I thought of Vincent. I thought of the way he looked at me after the gunshot, his eyes cold and sad at once, as if he had grown accustomed to people dying because of him. I thought of his words, "I owe you a life," and I wondered whether a man like Vincent truly felt indebted, or whether it was simply his way of weaving an invisible thread that pulled me toward his world. Whatever the truth was, I knew this was only the beginning. My new life had started with a strange debt, a single bullet, and a man unlike anyone I had ever known. Everything began with a strange phone call at 5:49 in the morning, when I was still half asleep after a long class and a deadline-heavy assignment. My phone buzzed nonstop until it jolted me awake, my eyes blurry with exhaustion, my hand answering on reflex before I even looked at the number. The other end stayed silent for a few seconds, and then a low, rasping voice spoke, neither clearly male nor female, just deep, dragging out each word as if deliberately aiming to chill the listener's spine. "Don't think you can walk away just because you saved him. We know who you are, where you live. You will pay like the others who stood with him." I froze, my heart stopping in place. I stammered, asking, "Who is this? Who are you?" But the line clicked off. Lydia was still asleep. I sat there clutching the phone for nearly 10 minutes, my mind blank, before I suddenly rose, pulled open the curtains, and peered down at the street through the narrow gap in the window. Nothing unusual, no one waiting, no strange vehicle, but the feeling of being watched clung to me the entire day. I tried convincing myself it was some sick prank from someone who had seen the news and wanted to scare me, but only a few days later, the second call came. This time at midnight, the same voice, but clearer now, more specific, more terrifying. You won't live long if you keep getting involved with him. You think 50,000 is enough to buy your life. This time, I called the police, but without evidence, there was nothing they could do. I changed my phone number, switched to an encrypted app, but then Lydia began receiving anonymous messages. They used my name, mentioned my school, even described the clothes I had worn that day. My sense of safety began to crumble piece by piece. I couldn't focus on studying or sleep properly. The same question echoed endlessly in my mind. Why? Why had saving someone turned me into a target? One night, while I was sitting in the campus library, I received an email containing only a single attachment. It was a photo of Lydia and me leaving the apartment that morning, taken from behind a parked truck. I froze, sweat breaking along the back of my neck. That was no longer a threat. That was proof someone was truly watching me. I rushed home that night, slammed the door shut, and dropped behind the sofa like a frightened child. Lydia wanted to call the police again, but I only shook my head. This time, I didn't call the police. I called Vincent. His voice was calm, without a hint of surprise, as if he had expected this to happen. "You should have called earlier, Claire. I will take care of it." And he did exactly that. The next morning, when I stepped outside the gates of our apartment building, a tall man in a black suit and sunglasses was standing there waiting. He nodded politely, but his eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. I stepped back, startled, until he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card with a simple line printed on it. Luca, assigned to protect Claire Monroe. Below it was an emergency number and the faint printed initials, V.D. I looked up at him again. "Your name is Luca." He nodded. I didn't know what to say. I simply walked forward, feeling something vast and unfamiliar, slowly tightening around me. Yet strangely, as I walked with Luca, trailing a few steps behind, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. I no longer felt entirely alone. I didn't know who Vincent DeLuca truly was, but I knew that once he decided to protect me, no matter how frightening the world outside became, I still had somewhere to stand. And it seemed that from the moment I pulled him out of the bullet's path, my fate and that man's had quietly bound themselves together. I did not know why I was so stubborn. Perhaps because I did not want to admit that my life had been completely altered after a single night and a single man. When Vincent suggested that I leave my apartment for somewhere safer, I refused. I told him I was fine, that having Luca with me was enough, that I could not abandon Lydia or my classes just because of anonymous threats. Vincent did not push. He only looked at me with a silent gaze that seemed to accept my choice, though deep down I knew he did not agree. In the days that followed, Luca was always there. He did not speak much, simply watched, keeping just enough distance not to suffocate me but never far enough that he could not react in time. I slowly grew accustomed to his presence, even found a strange comfort in knowing I was not alone. Lydia could not hide her worry. She did not object to the protection, but having a tall man standing quietly outside our door all day made her uneasy. We still went to class, still turned in assignments, still bought our morning coffee, until one night. That night the rain drizzled softly, and when I returned from a late class, I found the front door slightly ajar. Lydia was not home, I knew, because she had texted saying she would sleep at her boyfriend's place. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag as I pushed the door open. There was no sound, but a cold unease crept up my spine. Luca was not in the hallway as usual. I cursed myself for insisting he go home early after I told him I was fine. I stepped inside, forcing myself to stay calm, scanning the room. Everything looked untouched, until I noticed the wet footprints on the wooden floor. A faint sound came from the bedroom. I spun around, my heart beating so violently I thought I would pass out. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the apartment, my slippers flying off somewhere behind me. I dialed Vincent's number, not even pausing to wonder why I wasn't calling the police. His voice answered almost immediately, rough and firm. "Where are you?" I spoke quickly between panicked breaths. The apartment door was open. Someone went inside. "I'm in the hallway. I don't know if he's still in there." He didn't ask anything else, only commanded, "Stay where you are." Luca is on his way. Do not go back inside. I nodded even though he couldn't see me, gripping the phone as if it were the only thing holding me together. 10 minutes later, Luca arrived with another man. They searched the place, no one inside. The back door had been forced open. In my bedroom, the drawers were ransacked, yet nothing was taken. Not a robbery, a warning. I did not sleep that night, even with Luca staying in the living room to keep watch. The next morning, Vincent arrived. He did not ask if I was okay. He looked at me, his gaze darkening at the sight of my exhausted, trembling face, and then he said only one sentence. Pack your things. You are not spending another night here. I had no strength left to argue. I simply nodded, went to my room, and placed a few clothes and books into a suitcase. Lydia was still gone. I left her a message, explaining briefly that I needed to leave for safety. Vincent said little on the drive. His car was a black SUV with tinted windows, so quiet I could hear the faint tapping of rain on the roof. When the vehicle turned onto a tree-lined private road, I knew I was entering another world. Vincent's house was hidden behind tall iron gates and thick hedges trimmed with meticulous care. White walls, gray roof tiles, wide glass doors facing a garden. It was not lavish, not ostentatious as I had imagined, but carried a quiet, cold stillness that was difficult to describe. Vincent waited for me to step out of the car, not forcing, not urging, but I knew he would not let me walk away again. And for the first time since that night in the cafe, I did not feel like a victim. I felt as though I was taking another step toward him, toward something both dangerous and impossible to resist. Vincent's estate was unlike any place I had ever set foot in, not because it was grand or ostentatious, but because everything inside carried a deliberate quietness, the kind of stillness that belonged only to places not meant for the uninvited. When I stepped in, the long hallway stretched before me, its dark, polished wooden floors reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier lights above. The air held the faint scent of old wood mingled with jasmine, as though the house was always kept ready for the arrival of some important guest. Vincent led me through the main hall without speaking, merely signaling to a house steward in a pale gray suit to take my luggage and guide me to the room prepared for me on the second floor. The room was not large, but every detail was exquisite. Thick white drapes covered 2 wide windows overlooking the back garden. The bed dressed in pale cream linens with a folded-down duvet at its foot, and in one corner stood a small desk with a reading lamp and a neat stack of brand-new medical textbooks. I brushed my fingertips over their glossy covers, unable to speak. No one had told Vincent I had returned to nursing school, yet clearly he knew. He didn't need to ask. He simply prepared everything, as if he had understood my needs before I even voiced them. I spent the entire day learning how to exist in this unfamiliar space. Everything was clean, quiet, orderly to a degree that made me feel strangely out of place. No schedule to follow, no one demanding anything of me. Luca remained nearby, watchful and courteous, nodding politely whenever I passed him. Vincent vanished behind the door of the first-floor library for the whole afternoon. It wasn't until evening, while I was halfway through an anatomy text, that a knock echoed softly against my door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, perhaps 18 or 19, with long black hair and lively brown eyes that sparkled with quick intelligence. She wore a fitted knit dress with a light cardigan, her presence a mix of elegance and a hint of rebellion. "I'm guessing you're Claire. I'm Natalia, Vincent's sister." Her voice was fast and light, easy in a way that felt as if we had known each other before. My heart skipped, uncertain whether from surprise or from the way her presence suddenly made everything in this house feel more real. I invited her in, and within minutes we were seated across from each other, each holding a cup of warm tea she had brewed herself in the kitchen. She told me about their family, about growing up in big houses where guards stood at every entrance, about private tutors and escorted trips. I don't remember our parents much. Our mother died when I was very young. Vincent has always been everything: father, mother, protector. He's not what people think he is. He's just someone who learned not to let anyone hurt him again. Her words struck something deep in me, a quiet ache I hadn't known was there. I realized then that I wasn't the only one in this house trying to learn how to live with a past that still breathed behind every step. Natalia smiled mischievously when she caught the look on my face, as if she knew exactly what thoughts were passing through me. "Don't be afraid of Vincent. He's only harsh with strangers, but with someone he cares about, he's completely different." My cheeks burned. I lowered my gaze to my cup, unable to form a reply. Her words dropped into the calm surface of my mind like a pebble, sending ripples I couldn't quiet. Perhaps I didn't truly understand Vincent yet, but day by day, moment by moment in this house, I was inching closer to the man behind that distant, guarded stare. And perhaps that was what frightened me the most, not the house, not the threats lurking outside, but the growing sense that I no longer wanted to leave this place at all. The first real encounter between Vincent and me inside that estate did not arrive in the way I imagined. Not through a formal dinner or a conversation he initiated, but through a chance moment early one morning when I went downstairs in search of coffee. He was already there, standing by the large window overlooking the back garden, a black ceramic cup in hand, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to reveal the tense veins along his wrist. I froze at the doorway, unsure whether I should turn back or step forward. Vincent turned his head slightly, as if he had sensed my presence long before I arrived. He did not smile, but something in his eyes seemed softer than the last time I had seen him. "Fresh coffee. Do you want some?" His voice was low, quiet, yet carried that same cool distance that left me unsure whether I was supposed to nod or decline. In the end, I only nodded gently and walked toward the table, taking a seat on the wooden chair beside it. He poured the coffee into a white cup, set it before me with careful precision, then sat down as well, keeping enough distance not to overwhelm me, though not nearly enough for me to forget that I was sitting across from a man the world regarded with equal parts reverence and fear. We stayed silent for several minutes. I sipped my coffee, willing my hands not to tremble. Vincent watched me with that perceptive intensity of his, then abruptly spoke. "You still don't really trust me, do you?" I looked up, startled by his bluntness. I didn't know how to answer. Not exactly distrust, but I wasn't used to receiving help from someone like him without having to offer something in return. Vincent studied me, one leg crossed over the other, a strange calmness settling around him. He set his cup down, tracing the rim lightly before saying, "I am not a good man, but when someone pulls me out of the path of the first bullet meant for me, I cannot look at that person as a stranger." His words caught me off guard not just in meaning, but in the sincerity with which he said them, so real it made me want to believe him even when every instinct warned me otherwise. "Why me?" I whispered. There were so many people in that cafe that day. Vincent held my gaze for a long time, long enough that I felt stripped of every shield I had put up. "Because you didn't look at me the way they did. You weren't afraid. You weren't curious. It was just instinct. And in my world, instinct is worth more than loyalty spoken out loud." I didn't know how to respond. My heart beat in a strange, uneven rhythm. He continued, his voice even and low. "I know who is threatening you. Dominic is from the past, once an ally. Not anymore. He is not targeting you because of who you are. He is targeting you because you are the one who unsettles me." The sentence fell between us like a silent strike of lightning. I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. I only felt a storm rising inside me. Vincent stood and walked toward me, stopping half a meter away. He didn't touch me, he simply looked at me with a depth that made the air feel too thin to breathe. "Anyone who harms you, even in a dream, will not have the chance to do it again. I don't need your thanks. I just need you to understand that you no longer have to endure anything alone." I looked up at him, feeling the walls I'd carefully built inside myself shifting, cracking. I once believed Vincent lived in a world I would never belong to, but in that moment, standing before me was not a powerful man from whispered rumors, but someone trying to hold back the storms closing in on my life. And I found myself wondering whether my heart had been refusing something that might actually be right. I didn't answer, nor did I look away. I simply looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time as a woman looks at a man, not as a benefactor, not as a stranger. And in that quiet moment, I knew that whatever existed between Vincent and me had crossed into a new boundary, fragile, undeniable, and impossible to turn back from. The private dinner meant for just the two of us came as a surprise, though not in the glamorous way one might imagine when thinking of a Mafia kingpin inviting someone to dine with him. Vincent gave no warning, offered no formal invitation. He simply appeared at my door at 7 in the evening, dressed in a plain black shirt, one hand tucked into his pocket, his expression calm as though his presence there needed no explanation. "Are you hungry?" I made some pasta. I asked nothing, and I didn't refuse. We walked through the hallway, down to the kitchen, and I realized he truly had prepared everything himself. The scent of tomatoes and basil warmed the air in a way that made me feel as though I had stepped into a place startlingly ordinary, so different from the secret-laden walls of this house. He didn't ask what I liked or wondered about my tastes, yet somehow the pasta he cooked fit perfectly, every detail just right. We ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft clink of cutlery and the faint wind brushing through the slightly open window. Slowly, I felt my guard loosening not because I fully trusted him, but because I no longer wanted to pretend to be stronger than I was in front of this man. After we cleaned up, Vincent poured 2 glasses of red wine, set one before me, and sat across the table. "Did you ever imagine you'd be sitting here with me after that rainy night?" I gave a faint smile and shook my head. "Honestly, I didn't think I'd survive that night." "Neither did I," he replied, his gaze drifting outward before he reached into a kitchen drawer and pulled out a small box with an old, faded photograph inside. It showed a boy of about 10 standing beside a woman with sad eyes and a gentle smile. "My mother," Vincent said quietly. "She died in an accident that should never have happened, not if my father hadn't forced her into the car that night. He had been running from an internal purge, and she was simply dragged into it. After that, he raised me with power, with fear, with a twisted sort of love only those raised in darkness can recognize." I watched Vincent as he spoke, each word soft but weighted, pressing against my chest with an ache I couldn't name. He didn't need to share this with me, but he chose to. "Do you know what it feels like to grow up among men ready to kill each other over a single wrong word? I used to think I needed no one, no love, no need to be loved. And then I met you. Not in the cafe, but in the moment you looked at me as though I wasn't a crime headline. I held my wine glass, turning the deep red liquid slowly, my composure slipping inch by inch. What Vincent shared wasn't weakness, it was trust. And trust from a man like him was perhaps more valuable than anything else. I didn't know how to answer. I only looked at him and nodded slightly. "You don't have to say anything," Vincent added, his eyes softening, as though he had finally laid down a burden he had carried for far too long. "Just know that ever since you walked into my life, nothing has been the same." I left the kitchen when the clock struck 9:30, my heart heavy but no longer chaotic. I went upstairs, closed my door, and leaned back against it, my hand still carrying the warmth of the wine glass. And I realized I had begun to soften not because of Vincent's words, but because of the way he looked at me, as though I was the beginning of something he had never dared believe could exist. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength to step back ever again. That night, after returning to my room from dinner and the conversation that still left my heart pounding far too hard, I couldn't sleep. The light from the bedside lamp cast a pale golden wash over the pages of the book I could no longer read. Every line blurred, drowned beneath the lingering echo of Vincent's words and the way he had looked at me. I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cool Brooklyn night air slip through my hair and send a shiver down my spine. I assumed Vincent had retreated to his own room, but when I glanced down toward the garden, I saw him standing beside the water, hands in his pockets, head bowed slightly, his posture thoughtful as if speaking quietly with the shadows inside him. I didn't know what compelled me to go down there, perhaps the simple desire to be close, or a pull I couldn't yet give a name to. When I approached, Vincent didn't turn immediately, but I knew he sensed me. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, without looking back. I shook my head and stepped closer, until only a small distance separated us. His scent, warm wood and cool smoke, was something I had started to recognize, but standing this near, it caught my breath in my throat. Vincent finally turned, his eyes meeting mine beneath the faint shimmer of moonlight. I didn't know who moved first. I only knew that when his breath brushed my cheek, something inside me stilled, as if drawn toward him by an invisible force. His face was very close enough for me to count the lines of his lashes, close enough to see the strength and wear carved into his features over the years. His lips hovered a fraction from mine, a small distance, unbearably small, but then he stopped. No sudden movement, no pulling me in, only the space between us held perfectly still, as if time itself had paused. Vincent looked at me, his voice rough and low, rising from somewhere deep in his chest. "When you're ready, I will touch you the right way. Not sooner, not out of hunger, but because you allow it." The words sent a tremor through me, not from the cold, but because he had just seen something inside me I had not dared admit, something uncovered, unshielded. I said nothing. I only nodded gently, a silent acceptance, a sign that I wasn't refusing, only not ready yet. Vincent stepped back, his gaze softening before he turned away, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and the night thick with things unspoken. I returned to my room, not knowing whether the feeling inside me was disappointment or relief, but one truth settled deep in my chest. The fragile boundary between us had already been broken, not by a kiss but by something far deeper, by choice, by respect, and by a quiet promise that if we ever touched, it would be because both of us wanted it, not because of the past, not because of a debt, but because of something growing in the silence between us. Something I didn't yet dare to name but had begun to believe in. The news came on a fog-soaked morning while I was sitting in the reading room of the estate. a cup of steaming ginger tea in my hand, when Luca appeared with a tension in his jaw and a sharpness in his usually calm eyes that made my heart seize instantly with dread. "He's at the West Warehouse." Dominic hit it. I set the cup down too fast, my pulse thundering as if an invisible hand were squeezing my chest. I didn't ask what the West Warehouse was, because in Vincent's world nothing ever meant just storage. Every location carried risk and power, and if Dominic had chosen that place to strike, this was no longer an isolated threat. I wanted to go with them, but Luca stopped me. "You can't. You stay here." Vincent's orders. His words only fed the panic twisting inside me. I paced the hallway for 30 minutes, my mind spiraling with every worst possibility. When Vincent returned, the night had already fallen. He walked straight into the house, his coat streaked with smoke and the smell of gasoline, his expression so cold it frightened me. I rushed to him. "Are you hurt?" He didn't look at me, only peeled off his gloves, his voice low and edged. "No one died, but Dominic isn't playing at warnings anymore. He wants a war." I had never seen Vincent like this, not an eruption of anger, but a dangerous stillness, a quiet fury forged from steel and calculation. He moved into the library and ordered the door closed, and then shadows emerged, men I had never seen before, unarmed but carrying the sharpness of knives in their eyes. They spoke in words I didn't understand. Numbers, locations, retributions. I stood in the hallway, my chest burning. When Vincent finally stepped out nearly half an hour later, I was still there. He saw me, and for the first time I saw conflict in his gaze. "You shouldn't see this side of me, Claire." I didn't know what made me walk toward him, placing a hand on his shirt still dusted with ash and grit. "But I need to know what's happening, why Dominic is doing this." Vincent clasped my hand gently, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered while anger roared just beneath his calm. He hit one of my supply holds, disrupted a major line. Not just goods, a message. He wants to drag me into open war. "And what are you going to do?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. Vincent looked at me for a long time. What I saw in his eyes wasn't coldness, but the deep, marrow-deep ache of betrayal. Dominic was once someone he trusted. Now, there was no turning back. "I'm going to end this, my way." I knew what that meant. Violence, blood, retaliation, and loss. I slipped my hand from his, stepping back. "Vincent, you can't become what he is. You can't let him drag you into the same mud." He gave a quiet laugh, one touched only with bitterness. "You think I have another option? If I don't respond, he'll think I'm weak. And the weak in this world are torn apart." I said nothing more. I didn't know what the night would bring, but I knew this. If Vincent stepped into that darkness to face Dominic, nothing between us would ever be the same again. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy, and for the first time since entering this estate, I felt a raw fear not of losing him to death, but of losing him to a change so irreversible it approached like a storm. Vincent disappeared from the estate for nearly 2 days after the attack on the West Warehouse, and no one told me where he had gone or what he was doing, but I felt the shift in the air around me as clearly as if the walls themselves were whispering it. Natalia spoke less. Luca kept his distance, and unfamiliar men I had never seen before began appearing more often under the cover of night, their presence a reminder that the quiet within these walls was only a thin veil stretched over something far more dangerous. I barely slept, my mind crowded with images I did not want to imagine, because I had seen the look in Vincent's eyes when he said Dominic had left him no choice, and I knew that if he truly struck back, blood would follow, perhaps not only the blood of enemies, but his own, and I could not bear to let that happen without doing something. When he returned, dawn had not yet broken. I waited for him in the library, the room that always smelled of old wood and whiskey, the place where the harshest decisions of his life seemed to take shape. Vincent opened the door and stepped inside, his coat dusted with the grit of the road, his eyes exhausted yet as hard as forged steel. He was not surprised to see me. "You shouldn't be awake," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "I can't sleep knowing you are out there wagering your entire life on a war that doesn't need to happen." He said nothing, only looked at me, and his gaze was not cold, but distant, as though he were standing somewhere far beyond my reach. "Claire, this is not a world you should interfere in." I stepped closer, my voice trembling but steady. "No, you're wrong. I stepped into this world the night it rained at the cafe, the moment I pulled you out of the path of that bullet. If I can't stop you, then at least let me say this once." He stayed silent. I went on. "What does Dominic want? Power, recognition, a slice of territory. Have you ever thought that maybe he doesn't actually want to kill you, that maybe he just wants to shatter the illusion that you are untouchable, to prove that even you can be afraid. Vincent frowned. And you think I should sit down with him, drink tea, and talk like two politicians? No, I whispered, but with conviction. I think you should be smarter than he is. If you retaliate, you give him a reason to strike again, to escalate, to turn you into a replica of himself. But if you give him an excuse to stop while still saving face, then you won't just survive, you'll win. Vincent stared at me for a long time, unblinking, as if weighing every word I dared to offer him. Then he exhaled, and for the first time in 2 days, the sound wasn't carved from anger but from exhaustion. You think Dominic will agree to sit down? I think a part of him wants to live, just like the rest of us. And if he doesn't, at least you can say you tried. Vincent stepped closer, closing the distance until only breath remained between us, and placed his hand on my shoulder, the weight of it heavy with unspoken burdens. He tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering to a near whisper. You make me want to choose a different path, Claire. One I never believed existed. I didn't answer. I only took his hand and held it, gently but firmly. If a bullet can be stopped, then so can a war. You only have to be willing to listen. And he did listen. The next day, Vincent did not order a single strike. Instead, he sent a message to Dominic, not a surrender, but a calculated proposal. And for the first time, I saw a glimmer of light flicker through this shadowed world, a light I once believed could not survive here. It was hope, fragile, but real. And I knew Vincent saw it too, in my eyes, and in the quiet turning of his own heart. The meeting between Vincent and Dominic took place 3 days later in an abandoned warehouse chosen as neutral ground. And I was not allowed to go, of course, but I had seen Vincent's eyes before he stepped into the car. Eyes that no longer belonged to a man carrying anger, but to a man shouldering a decision far larger than himself. He had listened to me, and now it was time for his world to follow logic instead of blood. When Vincent returned in the late afternoon, I was in the back garden, keeping my hands busy by watering the lavender just beginning to bloom. He did not speak at first, only approached and stood behind me, silent like a warm shadow. And when I turned, when our eyes met, I knew it was over. They agreed. Dominic would pull back, keep his territory untouched, stay away from Vincent's operations, in exchange for a fragile peace and a few unspoken conditions I never asked about. I exhaled in such deep relief I nearly cried, not because Vincent won, but because he did not have to trade his soul to earn that victory. He had chosen another path, the path I believed he had longed for deep inside. That night, the estate was unusually quiet. Vincent sat beside me on the long balcony sofa on the second floor, from which the distant city shimmered under a blanket of lights. He held a glass of whiskey but did not drink, only turned it slowly in his hand, while I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling close to him in a way that no longer frightened me. You changed everything, he said into the night, his voice soft as wind. I never thought I could step back and still hold my head high, but you made me believe that sometimes a step back is how you protect what truly matters. I entwined my fingers with his, holding tight. You don't need to change for me. I just need to know you're living the life you choose, not a shadow dragged from the past. Vincent turned, his gaze gentler than any silence I'd ever known, a rare stillness carved out of years of storms. He brushed a hand through my hair, his eyes lingering on my lips for a long, suspended moment. But this time he did not stop. His kiss was as soft as a passing breeze, yet so deep it nearly brought me to tears, not because it was the first, but because it was the first he gave me without holding anything back, without fear, without the weight of his past, just two people choosing each other because neither wished to walk forward alone. When the kiss ended, Vincent rested his forehead against mine, his breath unsteady. You're the only thing that makes me want to live as a man, not a symbol. I smiled, and inside me every wound, every doubt, every fear dissolved like mist. From that moment on, without promises or labels, he and I stepped into something larger than ordinary affection, a love built out of the falls we survived, the understanding we shared, the courage it took to let someone else see us in our most unguarded form. And for the first time in many years, the future no longer felt like an uncertain blur but something real, something beginning right here, together. The bad news arrived on a morning that should have been peaceful. I was in the sunlit kitchen with Natalia preparing breakfast when Luca stepped in, his face drained of color and his eyes burning with anger held on a tight leash. Claire, I need you to step outside for a moment. The moment he said it, my heart clenched, because when Luca asked to speak to me alone, nothing was ever all right. We walked toward the backyard, far from anyone who might overhear, and he spoke briefly, each word falling into me like a slab of stone. Dominic has taken Matteo, Vincent's closest aide. They grabbed him when he went alone to the transfer station in Queens. Vincent doesn't know yet. We're confirming pieces. But according to internal channels, Dominic has already sent a silent message. If Vincent does not show up or offer further concessions, Matteo will not live to see dawn. I stood frozen. Matteo was the first person I saw after the night at the cafe, the one who brought me to the estate with worried eyes and a quiet reassurance that Vincent truly owed me a debt. He never looked at me with judgment, always gentle, like a silent older brother. And now he was being used as a bargaining chip in a game Vincent believed he had stepped away from. I returned to the estate and went straight to Vincent's office, where he was speaking with several of his men. When he saw me, he stopped, a flicker of worry passing through his eyes. He already knew. I walked closer, my voice disturbingly calm. Let me take his place. Vincent stared at me as if I had gone mad. What are you talking about? Dominic needs a bargaining piece, and now you have two choices. Lose Matteo or use me. I'm not part of your organization. I'm not strategically valuable, but I am something he knows you care about. Enough for him to use me to draw out terms. I offer myself, and you bring Matteo back. Vincent rose abruptly, his voice sinking into something darker than anger. You have no idea what you're saying. You don't know what Dominic is capable of. I looked straight into his eyes. No, I know exactly what he can do. But if you let Matteo die, you will never forgive yourself, and neither will I. You are not cold-blooded, Vincent. I know that. And Matteo does not deserve to die because you chose love over responsibility. I saw his hands clench, tendons standing out like cords beneath the skin. He turned away, as if my gaze itself hurt him. You think I could survive if something happened to you? I stepped closer and laid my hand gently on his back. I don't think. I know. And I also know that if I sit here watching Matteo die because I was too afraid to step forward, then whatever we have left will never come out whole again. He turned toward me, his eyes rimmed with red. If you walk into that, Claire, you may not return. I gave a faint, sad smile. And if I do nothing, then the man who comes back won't be you either. Silence stretched between us, heavy enough to bend the air. At last, Vincent lifted his hand to my cheek, his touch so soft it nearly broke me. Are you sure? I nodded, and in that moment I knew I was not only saving Matteo, but also salvaging the best part of Vincent, the part I had come to love from the very first small, unguarded moments. And whatever waited for me beyond this choice, I would walk into it with a heart that would not regret. I left the estate at dusk with a small bag and a heart as heavy as iron, slipping out through the side door behind the stables before Luca could notice I was gone. While the guards were distracted by a fabricated call Natalia had staged for me, and though I knew Vincent would be furious in a way that bordered on madness, I had no other choice. Matteo could not die, and if I could end this endless cycle of retaliation by using myself as leverage, then I would. I clutched the phone in my pocket, the screen still displaying the message I had received from an unknown number. Red Hook, Pier 41, come alone. Dominic chose an abandoned warehouse in Red Hook for the exchange, and when I walked in, the stench of rusted metal, oil, and damp rot pressed into my lungs. Dominic standing in the shadows with eyes as cold as ice, sweeping over me with a kind of amused satisfaction. So Vincent finally brings me his treasure. I didn't answer, only looked toward the back of the warehouse where Matteo was tied to a chair, his face swollen, his breathing so faint that something inside me cracked in two, and I stepped forward, holding my voice steady. Let him go. I am here, just as you asked. Dominic let out a thin, razor-edged laugh. You think I want you? No, Claire. I want Vincent on his knees. You are merely a tool, but you are the perfect tool. My skin went cold, but I did not step back. I stood between him and Matteo, fear crawling up my spine like a field of needles. That was when the metal doors exploded open, a sharp blast splitting the air, and Dominic jerked around too late as shadows stormed into the warehouse fast and precise like a black hurricane. I was pulled backward before I could understand what was happening, someone's arm locking around my waist hard enough to knock the breath out of me, and then I heard his voice. Claire, I've got you. Vincent. My voice broke on his name. He didn't look at me at first. He was looking at Dominic with an expression that froze my blood. Not anger, but the pure, merciless resolve of a man pushed past every limit. Dominic grabbed for his gun, but never raised it. Luca appeared from the side with his weapon already drawn, and a single shot rang through the warehouse. Dominic fell onto the concrete, his hand spasming as the gun slipped from his fingers. I didn't see blood because Vincent immediately turned. covering my eyes with his palm. "Don't look. You don't need to see this." He pulled me into his arms, holding me as if I had nearly slipped away from the world entirely, his breath against my hair uneven, shaking in a way I had never imagined possible for him. "You think I would ever let you walk out alone? You think I would let you die in place of my men?" I clung to him, gripping him as tightly as I could. "I couldn't stand by and watch Matteo be killed. I couldn't let you lose the best part of yourself." Vincent went still, then cupped my face, forcing me to look at him. "You are the best part of me. Not Matteo. Not anyone. You." He pressed his forehead to mine, our breaths tangling in the smoky, shadowed air. "If you disappear, Claire, I disappear with you. Do you understand?" I broke into tears in his arms, all the fear, tension, and pain from the past days crashing out of me like a flood, and Vincent held me, trembling as though he had been the captive instead of me. After Matteo was rushed to the ambulance and Vincent's men secured the area, Vincent lifted me into his arms and refused to let me walk on my own. On the drive back, he said nothing, only held my hand in a grip that bordered on desperation, as if letting go meant losing me to the night. When the car stopped at the gates of the estate, he turned to me with a look carved from relief and agony all at once. "If you run from me again, Claire, I will burn this whole city down to bring you home." I leaned into him, tears warm against his shoulder, but for the first time, they were not born of fear. They came from the certainty that I was loved, fiercely and without compromise, protected and cherished in the only way a man like Vincent knew how. And that night, I understood that every boundary between us had been erased completely. There was only him, and me, and a love with no way back. 6 months later, on a bright early summer afternoon, I stood in the courtyard of the nursing school wearing a crisp white gown, holding the diploma I once believed I would never have the chance to touch. Applause rising across the open-air hall, bouquets everywhere, embraces exchanged, tears slipping down the faces of my classmates. Yet my eyes searched only one place toward the man in a black suit standing quietly behind the rows of chairs, as if nothing in the world mattered to him except me. Vincent. The breeze moved through his hair, but his gaze never left me, not for a single heartbeat, and he didn't need to speak or wave or step closer. That look alone filled my chest with a warmth that felt whole and absolute. After the ceremony, when the crowd began to drift away, I slipped into the small garden tucked behind the lecture building, and he was there, just as I knew he would be. "You did it." His voice was low and soft, like the whisper of wind through the afternoon light. I nodded, smiling with a pride I couldn't hide. "Maybe because of you." "No." Vincent shook his head, stepping closer, his eyes serious yet full of tenderness. "Because of you. I only walked beside you." Silence settled between us for a breath, and then he reached into his jacket and drew out a small velvet-lined box, dark blue, modest, unassuming. He opened it to reveal a simple silver key that gleamed beneath the sun. Not a ring, not a rushed proposal, but an invitation. "Come home with me." I looked at him, and I didn't need to ask anything, because I knew that for Vincent this invitation carried more weight than any diamond ever could. It meant home, it meant choice. It meant a commitment without ceremony, just presence. I took the key, wrapped my arms around his neck, and held him tight, wanting to carve that moment into the deepest part of me. I will, not just today, but always. A week later, I moved into the estate that had once felt foreign and now felt like a place where my soul could finally rest. Everything changed in quiet, unexpected ways. I started working at a community clinic near Brooklyn, tending to ordinary people with ordinary hurts, experiencing the kind of healing that mattered in a life stripped of pretense. Vincent never interfered with my work. He simply drove me there, picked me up, and sometimes waited in the car for hours just to see me walk out safely. He remained the Vincent I had met in that cafe, the strength, the danger, but softened in the private spaces, where he no longer needed his armor. On warm summer nights we sat together on the balcony, drinking wine, sharing small pieces of our days, and sometimes saying nothing at all because looking at each other was enough. I don't know where this life will take us, but I know that every moment beside Vincent, despite the risks and the shadows, is worth more to me than anything else, because I no longer run from my past, nor fear my future. I simply live in the present, in the arms of the man who chose to love me in the fiercest and most honest way he knew. And I know for the rest of my life, I will never leave those arms again. The wedding took place on a gentle October morning, when the leaves had turned gold, and the autumn breeze brushed softly across the lake behind the estate, and there were no church bells, No jubilant choir, no hundreds of guests dressed in finery, only Vincent, me, Natalia, Luca, and an elderly pastor with kind eyes. A simple, private ceremony filled with a sincerity so overwhelming it felt sacred. I wore a modest white dress, my hair gathered in a low bun, holding a small bouquet of pale lavender that Natalia had picked from the garden, and Vincent walked toward me, not in a grand tuxedo, but in a classic black suit, though his gaze shone brighter than any sunrise I had ever known. When the pastor asked if he would take me as his wife, Vincent did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. "I belong to you, from the very first day." Those 4 words rose like a vow no extravagant wedding could ever rival. I nodded through the tightness in my throat when it was my turn, saying nothing more, because my eyes had already spoken every word. We shared the first kiss of our new life, not as fugitives, not as 2 people standing in the shadows, but as 2 souls choosing to walk side by side, no matter what the world might bring. After the ceremony, we sat by the lake, our hands intertwined, watching sunlight shimmer across the quiet water, and Vincent whispered that he had never believed he would have a day like this, a day so peaceful, a love so steady it made him want to live with gentleness for the sake of the person he loved. I smiled, realizing that every loss, every sorrow, every choice and sacrifice had led us here. This story is not only a journey of love, but also a deep lesson in forgiveness, courage, and the human capacity to change. Each of us carries a shadow, yet if someone is willing to see the hidden light inside us, we find a reason to grow better day by day. Perhaps you too have been hurt, frightened, uncertain about love or kindness. But I hope that through the story of Vincent and Claire, you can believe that the most beautiful things arrive in the moments we least expect. And what about you after listening to this story? Do you see a part of yourself somewhere along this journey? Have you ever loved someone you knew carried many scars, yet you chose to stay, not to fix them, but to heal alongside them? Share what you feel in the comments below. We truly hope to hear from your heart. If this story touched something within you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video so these meaningful moments can reach even more people. Our channel will continue bringing heartfelt, inspiring stories that invite reflection and empathy, each day offering something honest and precious. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment. Wishing you good health, joy in each day, and a heart that remains at peace. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.